Okay, great. So I'm going to introduce Neil, who, as I said, is talking to us today from Washington, D.C. Neil Takemoto is the founder and CEO of CoolTown Beta Communities. His work over the last 17 years has been committed to the crowdsourced development of places with significant economic, environmental, and social benefit, including a 17-acre transit-oriented development in Bristol, Connecticut, a car-free neighborhood in South Carolina, and a neighborhood cafe in Washington, D.C. Neil is also the founder of CoolTown Studios, a crowdsourced placemaking blog and news site that attracts 40,000 unique visitors a month. It's been featured in Architect Magazine and ULI's annual Developers Conference. Neil is also the co-founder of Bubbly, a crowdsourced web application, and Mob Fuse, a crowdsourced consulting firm. With Andres Duaney, Neil co-founded the National Town Builders Association in 1997, the only business trade group of smart growth, new urbanism, real estate developers. Prior to that, he founded a national nonprofit educational clearinghouse for the new urbanism field. Today, Neil will show how crowdsourcing is already happening in Connecticut, New Hampshire, and New York, with planning, urban design, and architecture that returns to pedestrian-oriented, human-scale downtowns centered around activity-filled plazas, but with a contemporary vibe because, as he says, that's what the crowd wants. Neil will demonstrate how he harnesses the power of the crowd, those that didn't have a say in placemaking in the past, and how an enthusiastic community can attract investment for the development of extraordinary places. And you can visit Neil at his website, which is www.cooltownbeta.com. And with that, Neil, take it away.
Thanks, Rob. First of all, would you mind asking the crowd via show of hands how many people are familiar with crowdsourcing?
Anybody? Got 4 or 5 hands.
Okay. I'm going to assume everyone knows about placemaking, so I'm going to skip that part. So the first question is, what is crowdsourced placemaking? And essentially, it's sourcing a crowd to make places. I mean, that's the quick and easy way to remember what that is. The more complex definition would be, I'm not sure if you can read this, but it says crowdsourced placemaking is the act of taking real estate development tasks traditionally performed and funded by real estate institutions and sourcing it via an open call, basically it means to anyone, to a large community with shared values and ultimately shared funds. And the purpose of that's the crowdsourcing aspect of it. The placemaking aspect of it is to transform existing spaces into places people are passionate about, feel invested in, places of the soul that people have shared values in, which is, again, part of what crowdsourcing is about. So you're actually now building places that people have shared values in that uplift us and connect us. So that, in essence, is what crowdsourced placemaking is. And I'm not going to expect anyone to memorize that. I mean, I'm not even able to memorize that. So what I use is this chart that explains the concept of crowdsourced placemaking using a concept called the long tail. Now, the long tail is an economic term, and it describes sort of a balance of power. Say if you took the entire population of the U.S. And then you sort of took a sort of a y-coordinate or a vertical measure of like real estate power. Now you take the most powerful people, and then from the most powerful to least powerful, sort of have a power curve like that, where the people with the hand in real estate decision making, whether it be cities or real estate developers or institutional funds, have by far the most power, and then it drastically drops down to people without any influence. And as you can see in this red part, this is where all decision making in real estate is made. Once you sort of pass a certain level of real estate influence, you pretty much don't have a say in what happens in real estate development. The idea of, so this is basically known as a big head, and this is known as a long tail. People here are shared values, mainly tied around return on investment, and shared values here sort of center around quality of life. So as a result, you would typically get places that look like this. I'm not sure if you can see this. This is just a typical strip mall, which follows one of the 19 conventional development types because it maximizes shareholder returns. And then as far as the population is concerned, in the long tail, you tend to get places like this, which is not geared around just return on investment, but also what's socially and environmentally beneficial. And this is part of the reason why, because all the power is concentrated here, is you only see places like this, and we haven't seen places like this since the 1920s. But times are shifting. And we want to ask the basic question is, what's in it for architects? The answer to me is that would you rather be designing places that look like this or places that look like this? That's in essence what the benefit is for architects in crowdsourced placemaking. So then another question is, when will this happen? And the answer is, if you look at a measure of culture today, Time Magazine's Person of the Year 2006, 2010, 2011, there seems to be a pattern here where 2006, the Person of the Year was you, people who are writing blogs, people who are tweeting and putting things on YouTube. 2010, Mark Zuckerberg, Facebook, and 2011, sort of the change in government happening across the world based on crowds of people sort of with shared values coming together to make to influence decision making. So the time is, to answer the question, when is this happening, the time is now. So let's go straight into an example. Like, how is this actually happening now as far as crowdsourced placemaking is concerned? This is a project in Bristol, Connecticut. This is about a 17-acre site. It's a former strip mall, shopping mall. That was the heart of the downtown. This here was basically what's left of the main street, just this little 6 buildings right here.
Hey, Neil, there you
yes.
go. Now we're caught up to you.
Okay. Thanks for mentioning the delay. So this large area is a gigantic parking lot, and all that's left of the downtown is in the bottom right-hand corner. In the next slide, we sort of polled people, what public amenities would you like to see? And we didn't just poll them as far as like a one-time survey. It was an open site where it's sort of like an open voting site where people submitted ideas and then they voted on them, and you sort of saw the running count over about 2 or 3 months. And so over time, this is what resulted. We said if any idea that gets over 200 likes within a 2-month period, we'll consider for in the master plan. Forgot to mention that a developer was chosen to develop that site by the city via RFP, and once the developer was chosen, they said we're going to apply crowdsourced placemaking. So after 2 months, the crowd said we wanted a piazza, a visual art performing arts center, and a sort of a river walk, more like a. They were thinking of the style that you saw in San Antonio. So of the 3 ideas, they did a feasibility study and said that the river walk would cost about $6 million to actually to daylight the river, so that was not feasible. The Visual Performance Arts Center was $14 million to renovate the building they had in mind, so that wasn't really feasible. But the piazza, which was the most popular idea, that was considered feasible. So at the same time, they also did sort of a retail survey where they let people submit ideas for what kinds of amenities they want to see in the downtown. The most popular were...
Hey,
yes?
Can I interrupt you for a second?
Yeah.
Was it the city that mandated crowdsourced placemaking as part of the process, or was it the developers' initiative?
It was the developers' initiative as part of the RFP. They were the ones who initiated this. The city was asking, what is crowdsourced placemaking? And actually, there's still, I think, they were struggling with it for a long time, but they said, you know, if you're involving the public, then it's a lot more involved than any of the other submissions we have. So as far as they were concerned, they didn't understand crowdsourced placemaking per se, but they liked the concept because it centered around involving the citizens in decision making. So they thought that was a politically astute move for them. So the next slide here is we also did a retail survey where we asked people what they wanted. So the top ideas were a bookstore cafe, a brew pub, live music venue. And again, we did the feasibility study, and the results were that a bookstore cafe wouldn't survive. If you call it more of a literary cafe with books as a theme and then add a performance space, then it became feasible. The brew pub and live music venue were also sort of deemed feasible. The live music venue needed sort of a restaurant component to it to make it feasible financially. So that's how that sort of developed. So as you can see, the crowd, through their input, through voting, through comments, which is shown by this slide here. This is gobristolsurvey.com. This is where people were submitting ideas and liking ideas and commenting. And I'll go through this via the website, once we're done and we're doing a Q&A. But as you can see, the Piazza is number 1. This Larry Cafe is number 2. Organized via public amenities or retail or residential. And so the most popular ideas are the ones that the developer considered, did a feasibility on, and started to consider for the master plan. So what happens, the whole effort started off in November, and as people got involved in campaigning for different ideas that they want to see happen, you could see memberships start to grow from a handful of people to what is now 1,600 to 1,700 people. So November 2010 to today, so that's about 13, 14, 16 months. Then what we're doing now is taking it to another level of like, what about housing? So we're saying that if there's a certain number of, there's a certain level of evidence that people are willing to live in the downtown, which a lot of cities have difficult time measuring, as far as the general consensus is, well, people don't want to live downtown, it's dangerous, or it's not safe, or there's nothing there, why would I want to move downtown? So we're sort of creating a campaign, well, if it was something else, if it was more vibrant, and if other people were moving, would you want to move there? And so the idea is to survey this as if we're all moving to the downtown at the same time, not asking a few people to be the first ones, and sort of be the ones to actually sacrifice their safety or lack of vitality to start the wave, but ask if we all do it at the same time. So we have a chart now where over the next 3 or 4 months, we're looking to get at least 400 people to say they're willing to live downtown, and not only that, but pick among 8 housing types that they feel they'd be more preferential to live in. We give price points, price ranges, amenities, sort of guidelines, and how many bedrooms, and people sort of vote among those 8 likes, 8 preferences. And so far, the most popular is the 2-bedroom, moderately furnished. So what happens with that is people supporting downtown housing, where it wasn't really recognized at all, measured at all, to now where it's sort of on the rise here. And then the next phase would be whether it be a business or specific housing project, that should present that as its own idea with its own survey and start to say, we're going to build this loft building at this address on Main Street, on the Piazza, for instance, and we want to know what kinds of units we want to live in there, what kinds of perhaps retail, what a retail establishment we want to see in the ground floor, and people start submitting and campaigning for ideas that they want to see in that specific project, specific building, specific location, and with a specific developer in mind. So that's the next phase. And this is where, for a developer, this is what all that matters to them, is that it then increases the number of pre-leases of people that are interested. So this is how the crowd, to a developer, says, why would I be interested in listening to the crowd? This is the answer why. So in essence, that's how you can see this becoming that. And in Bristol, the crowd wanted to see what this would be like. So back in August of last year, they planned a pop-up piazza festival where, like, on the empty lot, they planned a piazza festival as if it was already there, and what would it be like? And so here's a little montage. Actually, these are pictures taken by Project for Public Spaces, who helped actually plan the event. And they had a record, I think it was the largest crowd ever for a public event, and between 15,000 to 20,000 people. And it shows you how much the crowd wanted something like this. And in the end, again, what does this matter to a developer? Within a year, the whole plan was basically approved by the city council. So that's the basic concept behind crowdsourced placemaking. And I'd be glad to get into more details and answer questions. And I think it's more advantageous to, at least I found in my presentations, to keep my presentations shorter to provide the general concepts, and then just open it up to Q&A, and I sort of provide answers that way.
Okay.
So,
great. Thank you. So I'll lead off and ask the first question, and then everybody just feel free to chime in.
Sure.
The developer in the Bristol example specifically, he was interested in this. Why? Was it to help inform his own market research? Was it to make the public approval process easier, demonstrate the demand for his product with lenders? Is all of those, what caused him to go through this process rather than stay on the head end of the long tail?
Yeah, I mean, that's a fantastic question, and it really was at the heart of how this all started. The answer was, I think people are familiar with sort of the creative class studies. Richard Florida, economist, wrote these studies, did these studies that showed cities that had sort of the creative industries and young professionals tended to have economic development at greater levels and increasing at faster rates than other cities. And so developers, and as there are many cities, were convinced that this is really where they wanted to invest in. So they want to know, how do we attract young, creative professionals? Of course, among other markets as well, including empty nester baby boomers and small businesses. So to answer that question is the creatives, these young professionals, they wanted urban living. They want to walkable environments. I mean, I'm very familiar with some of these studies now, but what I told them is, at the same time, because of what you're seeing with this slide here, that with the Time Person of the Year increasingly being individuals organized as crowds, I told them, you want to attract the young professionals and the creatives. They're going to want to have a say in the places that they're going to live in, because that's what they're used to in every other aspect of their lives, where they have a say in what's going on. Crowdsourcing being prevalent in just about every industry at the time except real estate. And so, at first it took them a year to actually sort of weigh the idea of crowdsourcing. They liked that. They liked the fact that there was a methodology to it, but as far as like the idea of giving up control and putting it in the hands of people who were not on their staff, it was a little scary to them. And so we did a little pilot project for 3 months where I basically said, let me just do this. I'll take the financial risk. Or at least I'll take most of the financial risk for 3 months. And then after 3 months, we built up a crowd to a few hundred people, and they said, this works. We're convinced. Let's go full bore. And ever since then, they've not only gone full force with this in Bristol, but they're now expanded that to 3 other communities.
Yeah, go ahead.
Who came up with a list of potential alternatives that were posted to the sites for people to respond to?
Hey, Rob, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, the question was, who came up with the initial list that was posted that gave people options to which to respond?
Right. So the initial idea is, we talked about it at, the important thing about the crowdsourced placemaking as far as in Bristol is that you have the online component, and then you also have a face-to-face component. Every month we would have a monthly meetup where people would gather together and we discuss the progress of where we're at, how we're going to go about this, suggest ideas of what they could post on the site, and just sort of discuss it among groups. What we do at the first major meetup we had in December 2010 is we had people introduce themselves, and around the room they would just raise their hands and say, what are you interested in? What do you want to see in the downtown? So we picked out themes of like, there's a lot of interest in skating rink. There's a lot of interest in some kind of a public town center. There was interest in doing something with the river. So we had breakout groups and people suggested and talked about ideas, and from there we helped them flesh out ideas that we could post formally on the site. And so initially we seeded the plaza idea, we seeded the Riverwalk idea, and someone there also seeded the public amenities idea. So we did all this with them, suggesting it face-to-face first, because if you just started off with this only online, no one would have submitted anything because they would have no idea what other people were thinking, and they sort of like to get shared ideas with other people. So to answer your question, we formed those initial ideas with the crowd and posted it for them, and ever since then, the crowd has been submitting all the ideas. There's about 170 or 180 ideas now, and I think we've submitted the first few, and then they submitted all the rest.
And we have another question? Yes.
Yeah. How do you manage the gap between desire and feasibility?
Oh, sorry, Rob, can you repeat that?
How do you manage the gap between desire and feasibility?
Well, the first phase of it is desire. So I'm going to go. I'm going to go to the site right now. This is the gobristolsurvey.com is where we put all the ideas on. And here they are. And can you guys see that right now?
No, not yet, but I think it'll load in a second.
Okay. Well, once you do, you'll see the ideas listed. And initially, we tell the crowd, and then when we do these monthly meetups, it really helps to have these face-to-face meetups because there's a nice chart called the 1-9-90 rule, where it says one person will actually submit content, 9 people will support them, and the other 90 won't do anything. They do your typical membership. So it's important that the face-to-face meetups were the people we'd identify, that 5 or 6 people who actually do something, as well as the people who would support them. And then online, you would have the people who would view and see what's going on and support or lightly support, but really not do much else. So with the crowd, we sort of they talked about ideas, and we actually tell them, that probably wouldn't be feasible. Like if someone said, let's just tear up the entire parking lot and make that unearth the river that's underneath so that we can have it have a river walk in San Antonio. And those are the times where we say that's probably not going to be financially feasible, but something like a piazza would be. So I mean that's the time where we can actually talk about it openly. And so the initial seeders of the ideas are briefed in the face-to-face meetings whether we think initially if they're going to be feasible or not. But we'll always try to let them present the idea, so maybe not unearthing the river, but maybe we can do a boardwalk along the river that is above, that isn't covered by asphalt. So we'll always try to sort of find a feasible version of the idea. And so once that gets out, people just sort of start liking and promoting and campaigning for the ideas. And even if someone who hasn't come to the meetups posts something that's not feasible, you'll get a comment or two from other people saying, that's never going to work, or we don't have any tax rolls to actually put in to renovate that into a performing arts theater. We just don't have the money for it. Other people will actually start to chime in with their comments and actually state that that's not feasible. I really wouldn't advocate for something like that. Try this instead. So the crowd would actually do the feasibility analyses for us in general. And then once the ideas became sort of got to a level of popularity, we would actually go to a formal feasibility study and say, is this really, how can we make this feasible if it's not, and what would it take financially to make it happen? So there's always a discussion on feasibility from the beginning to the end, and we try to make people aware of that. And actually, when you take collective intelligence into play, a lot of people will start to tell other people that's not feasible, rather than us having to be the so-called experts, because I think for the most part, collective common sense sort of plays out.
Other questions? Yes.
Do you see the developer, the designated developer, requiring of their architect, whom they hire to do the design based on the program that's been crowdsourced, to continue to use the crowdsourcing mechanism to refine their actual physical design?
Yeah, I mean that's a good question. This is probably one of the most important points I want to make on behalf of architects, is that crowdsourcing crowdsourced placemaking is definitely not in any way, shape, or form designed by committee. It is all it is collecting values of the people who are going to be living, working, playing there, and then giving the architect more of a knowledge base of what to design, then and better understand what is it the market really wants, which is a plus because developers typically, as I was mentioning before, are more single bottom line oriented, or especially with the institutional fund, they already have their sort of forms already in place, and the architect has much more limited palette to work with because of that. So that being said, the developers typically have architects that they're already working with so that they can work in this whole process from the very beginning. Say, for instance, in the beginning, people are submitting ideas initially that we think are going to be very popular, but might not be feasible, or we think they're going to be popular, but the crowd's just not quite getting the concept of what really good models will look like. We'll have someone on the architecture or design team draw renderings of what they may have in mind to get them sort of more on board with what the vision might be. So I'll show you an example. In Nashua, New Hampshire, there's the most popular idea there was this river promenade, and people are having a hard time understanding what a riverfront promenade park could look like. So during the process, one of the architects sort of drew up this vision, saying, how about something like this? This community fire pit idea was something the crowd was talking about. General Park was something the crowd was talking about. And so to help communicate what a riverfront promenade park would look like, the architect sort of came up with some visions that say, is this something like what you have in mind? And sort of help guide the process. So I think it's really important to help visualize what the crowd is asking for throughout the process. As far as the piazza in Bristol, the rendering of that piazza wasn't done until all the deadlines and things were reached. So there's no set way to do things, but whatever we feel will motivate the crowd, and if we think it's already a good idea and they don't really need to prove it, we'll help them along and say, if this is what you had in mind, we'd be glad to help you sort of campaign for the idea to make it happen because we think it's a great idea as well.
Another question, when it gets down to the level of detail as opposed to concept and program, can you give an example, is there an example, of where the crowdsourcing activity actually changed the initial idea of what a form would be, either an open space or a building, where based on program somebody said, let's have a piazza that's square, and in reaction to crowdsourcing it changed into a long rectangle or a circle or something? Is there an example of how crowdsourcing actually changed form during the design development?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's as far as form is concerned, I think the biggest, we haven't actually gotten to that part yet. Where I would say it's definitely influenced, the crowd can make a major influence in this category, and probably has indirectly in Bristol, is height. They'll vote up ideas that are more of the human scale height, 4 or 5, up to possibly 6 stories. But across the board, it's generally what the crowd's going to say is we don't want anything taller than that. And the developer already understands this beforehand, and so if they're going to talk about taller heights, that becomes one of the most important discussions at the very beginning. And I guess it's also contextual. If you're in Manhattan, that's another story. The other part of it that I think is going to make a play is in building proportions. Your typical, and this is kind of something I have a little more of a, I have some personal preferences here, mainly because of understanding what I'm doing studies and what neighborhoods are considered more valued as far as property value than others. And you look at all buildings built in the 1920s, those neighborhoods are the most valued by far. The ones built in the 1670s, the suburbs, I mean, those downtowns, urban renewal areas, the property values aren't as high as the ones built in the 20s. And so my sort of urbanist background, maybe I shouldn't say that. That's probably like a, well, more of my design background, should I say. Looked at proportions that were more human proportions. So taller buildings like you see in Amsterdam, buildings that were more vertical, as they say, more human proportions in the windows, tend to be what people prefer over sort of the horizontal mid-rise types of buildings, just because of it's more of a walkable human scale. And that's where I think you'll see the largest levels of influence, where as we sort of give people options in these, we've had visual preference surveys, but the difference between the visual preference survey and this is that we're actually talking about real buildings that we're going to be building, not general character for a city. So we've already got indications that people are preferring sort of these more of a human proportion buildings. And again, I think that's really, really enlightening, because those are the neighborhoods that are most valued today, and the kind we actually haven't built in about 90 years.
We have another question here, yeah.
I assume when you're doing a crowdsource for a project, you want the people who are giving you ideas to live right in the area where they could actually rent the space or go to the pub or use the open space. How do you qualify the? I guess the other thing is, I assume that when you get into large crowdsourcing, you're doing a lot of electronic. You're reaching out to people and having them come in. And so how do you know that you're getting only people who live in that area?
Right. Okay, so there's two levels. I want to take, let's go back to the Bristol site, and I'm going to go to this section here. Actually, I was already on that page. So this explains how we're doing this with housing, and going from the general crowd to specifically ones that are looking at specific housing. Well, first of all, the first layer when someone registers at the site is we ask them a qualifying question. Do you live or work within an hour or so of Bristol? And then we ask them, what's their stake in Bristol? And, people can lie, but like people who tend to lie generally wouldn't want to answer a question that's qualitatively asking them, what's your interest in Bristol? And if it sounds like solicitation, we'll reject them. And we found that it's been pretty, we haven't had a single instance so far that I can recall of the 1,500 people that have registered of anyone that we found out later that they were lying, or they're saying that, they were there for other circumstances. We reviewed 1,500 registrations, and they're sort of long-form answers to why they're involved in the project. All of them have an answer like, I've lived here for 20 years, I want to see something happen, or I own property here and I have an investment, or I just want to see something downtown happen. I've been visiting there for years and there's no place to go. And we tend to get an idea for like what is it that makes someone what they say that makes them qualified to like for us to know that they live there or work there. That's really sort of like a judgment call, but I think we've got asking them and sort of reading every single registration. We feel pretty confident that we're getting people that really care about Bristol, and really they wouldn't register, they didn't care anyway. But that's the first level of qualification. The next level beyond, say, a certain interest. So it starts with a triple bottom line on the crowd, and we also say we have a terms of agreement that if you don't agree to the triple bottom line, which is being economically, socially, environmentally beneficial, then you're violating the terms of agreement for the site. And so after the developer invests in the Bristol Rising vision, so does Bristol Rising, the membership grows. I'm getting towards answering your question in a second. We launched a housing campaign asking only people, again this is a qualifying question, only if you're considering living in a downtown, would you please sort of participate? And again, this is a very honor system oriented approach, where the 400 likes, you're probably going to get maybe half of them not really considering, but just wanting to see the number of likes go up to show support. But from there, we've already calculated that number, because what we really need from that is 45 pre-leases. So that's how we came up with 400, assuming for all those people that are not really interested in the downtown. And we did, and this also came with the basic knowledge where we sent out a survey prior to was about 800 people, and about 40-something% said they were interested in living in downtown. So we kind of have an idea how many people. Quick story, the newspapers actually, because of all the publicity and the fact that they want to see this happen in their own town, they sent out these 8 housing entry ballots for free as inserts in their newspapers. So it kind of shows you how even the private sector and the news is actually helping advocate for revitalization in the downtown. So to answer your question now, once we get to a specific building and say, you know, we want to see who's interested in, not if we have a general idea of what people are interested in as far as housing is concerned, we're going to actually build the first housing project. And we got to know if you're actually interested in putting a down payment to live there and actually looking to live in this specific building. So we're going to have a special section on the site where we sort of require them, if you want to participate in this level, we're asking you to submit your salary range, other questions if you're traditionally living in the downtown, when are you looking to buy. Those are the qualifying questions we were going to ask people to answer before they participate in this sub-survey aspect of it. And we're going to ask also people to say, if you want to participate and you actually want to rent here, we're going to need you to reply to this list that says you're interested. So we're going to actually have a running physical list of people's names to say, if you're not on this list that you physically said that you want to consider living here, we're not going to take your participation into account. And from that level, once you sort of get an idea of at least maybe 50 people saying they're interested in living here and putting them on a formal list for this specific project, then we'll go to a pre-leasing qualification process, and then from there a pre-leasing and down payment process. So it really, you want to get people with very low barriers to entry to just sort of register. All they need is the username, password, and their birth date, why they're joining, and then the more they get interested in specifically living in a specific project, then we require them to provide more and more information. But knowing that all the information they're providing only gets in increased detail to the point where we're actually looking to actually build something based on their decisions.
Yes. Question over in the corner off camera.
So sort of the paired question to how do you make sure that the people that are participating are actual people that might use it. How do you get a diversity of participants? So in terms of age and income and race, and to make sure that you're not doing crowdsourcing that's everybody's coming from the same sort of socio-demographic group.
Did you hear that, Neil?
Yeah. Well, we don't actually have statistics on income yet. Primarily because it's just something we didn't want to ask people when we asked them to register. Age is a requirement, and as far as age is concerned, it's amazing, but what age group do you think was the most participatory in terms of registering and participating online? What would you guess?
45 to 50.
Yeah, actually, you're absolutely right. I mean, a lot of people thought it was going to be. Yeah, and then actually, maybe I should show you. Let me see if I can find this chart.
Well, I think the reason I guessed that correctly is because those are the people who have the most stake in the game, as opposed to people you think might participate, the younger people, people who are more, who live more of their lives in social networking and online, but they have less stake in the game in terms of real estate investment or kids in the schools or long-term residency in a town. My guess is that 45 to 50 is where you get a crossing of those two graphs, people who have made a substantial investment in a community and yet are young enough to at least understand how to go on the internet.
Right. Can you see this chart?
Yes.
So here are people in their 40s and 50s right here in the middle. That's the greatest amount of participation we've had on the site. And even in our meetups, it's mainly people in their 40s and 50s. And it's interesting what we found, and this is where this gets into the socioeconomic side of things, but the general consensus of what we feel is why people in their 20s aren't participating this is actually culturally, is because if this town is economically challenged, especially if you're talking about a small city, where it's not cool to admit that you're from Bristol, it's even worse to admit that you're actually looking to stay there. So a lot of people don't want to admit that they're looking to stay there beyond 1 or 2 years. And for them, the right thing to say is, yeah, I'm looking to leave in the next couple of years. Bristol's not cool enough for me. And that's kind of what we're seeing with the people in their 20s. We're pretty confident that once we sort of hit a certain tipping point, they're going to be saying just the opposite. But it's no surprise that based on sort of what we're finding now is that, yeah, people in their 20s are not going to participate until it hits a level, sort of hits a cool level, cool threshold where it's now hip to be participating in this. So we're just about hitting that tipping point. We're not quite there yet, but it's just about the point where people in their 20s are now saying to be proud. We're actually seeing comments now where people are saying, wow, I actually am excited about living in Bristol. I'm actually proud to say I can invite friends here rather than I have to go there, to their town. So that's just starting to happen. As far as the economically, because of, we found also in Long Island and sort of the lower income areas that we're working there, people just don't have the faith that anyone's going to listen to them. So it's very hard to get participation initially in the lower income areas until you address the needs that they're most interested in. And so before you can even get to like what kinds of public amenities and retail and shops you want, first things we have to address there are what's your plan for housing, what's your plan for jobs. And we found that they're not going to participate in any kind of crowdsourced placemaking until you answer those two questions first.
Interesting.
So that's a whole other story there. But, that's how do you crowdsource placemake your jobs plan and your housing plan, but that's another story.
For some of those of us who buy into a lot of the new urbanist thinking and have studied people like Jan Gehl and Kevin Lynch and Jane Jacobs, and PPS's approach to what make good spaces and what people are looking for, we kind of have a body of knowledge that we think we know what make good spaces and what people are looking for. So here's my question.
Yeah.
Have you encountered any responses in the course of doing crowdsourcing that were unexpected answers, that weren't what you thought people really wanted?
Well, actually, I'm probably going to have you. I'm going to provide an answer, and you'll probably have to maybe restate differently because your question prompted something that's very important for me to state, especially in the design field, is that if you see, everyone sees the picture of the piazza shown right here.
Yeah.
This is something that a lot of new urbanists would say, don't even try this. It's not possible. It's not going to work. It's going to fail. Mainly because where's the street traffic? Where's the parking? No client of mine is ever going to invest in this. Don't even try it. It's just going to be a disaster. It's going to give us a bad name. Of course, you've heard the things about pedestrian malls, about how don't even go there. Don't even try that. It's going to fail. It failed in the 70s. It's going to fail now. This is the same thing with this sort of a car-free piazza, which actually is even a step beyond that. Street parking, you can't get a street parking, but you're seeing this trend. So the biggest surprise, and it's not a surprise because I've been actually seeing this in the new urbanist circles for the last 10 to 15 years. I've actually been in the CNU circuit since it started off in the early 90s. It's the same thing. It's just people, we need cars, we need traffic for places to survive. And that was probably the case more so that in the stronger case maybe 10 years ago, but we sort of hit, again, the shift where you look at charts showing Gen Yers and teens, the number of driver's license applications are going down. Driving today is not as cool as it was 10 years ago. People are, if you ask a lot of the Gen Yers, you're saying like, I don't want a car. I want to live with car free. I live in DC. I don't have a car. There's no parking for my building at all. I live in a building that kind of looks like one of these buildings, and no one complains about not having a car. In fact, most of my friends don't. It's sort of a shifting culture as we move back to cities, which we weren't doing 10 years ago, but we're doing now. There's a shift in that walking without owning a car is becoming, again, cool again. So the other aspect of it, like street side parking in San Francisco, restaurants, I mean, architects will say, or designers or politicians will say, like, you can't get rid of those street parking spaces because that's what provides vitality. But the restaurant owners there are saying, please get rid of them so that we can put outdoor seating. And sort of the city of San Francisco has some kind of a parklet program where they're allowing merchants to replace their parking spaces in front of their businesses with outdoor seating. And it's been very well received. And San Francisco also has a Parks to Plaza program where they're taking streets and closing them down to cars, and people are just filling up. And the same thing with New York City, where you're seeing Times Square becoming more pedestrian-oriented and taking out auto lanes and replacing them with outdoor seating. So and there's another trend called ciclovias, or on Sundays or Saturdays during the summer, several miles of road are closed down to cars, and people just sort of inhabit it for a day or a few hours, and they've been wildly successful. So there's a trend towards places like this, but it's right now, for the most part, still they're usually criticized for being impractical, unrealistic, and doomed to failure. But at the same time, I'm saying emerging crowds want places like this, and they're willing to sort of, like, maybe this is an extreme point, but they're willing to do a 99 to 1% protest to prove that these places will work. And ironically, these protests are happening in these kinds of spaces.
Question in the back?
It seems like the only source that you're pulling your crowdsourcing are these online surveys. Are you thinking of matching it with any real-time data like Twitter, such that Bluefin Labs has done in Cambridge, where they're actually taking real-time data responses and being able to analyze that based on the populations? So it's not just this online survey. Is there any kind of cross-platform crowdsourcing that you're using?
I mean, that's a really good question. Maybe I should talk to you after this meeting. But be sure to contact me about that. So right now, what we've done in essence with this is we have Twitter, we have Facebook, and those are generally asked. Those are just generally mostly qualitative questions. We ask people sort of like, what is it you want to see in these kinds of spaces? We have that being formally asked in the survey site, but in Facebook it's a little more informal and more qualitative, and it's conversational. And so we tend to actually ask people, what their opinion of this and that is on Facebook. And on Twitter, we haven't had sort of interactive uses yet. It's primarily used as a real-time information network. And again, it's really important, as I'm finding more and more, that you need to have, it's a wise investment to hire somebody who's running a crowdsourced placemaking program that is very versed in outreach and marketing. I mean, I think that's by far the most important aspect of crowdsourced placemaking, is someone who knows how to use Twitter and Facebook as far in terms of outreach. Because one criticism I have about the Bristol project is we're not using our Twitter account to tweet real-time information of what's going on, say at the meetups and things. So that's really also been missing. And I think it's also important to record these meetups with video and post those. And so those are all also things that we've done off and on, but I haven't been consistent with. We have done monthly surveys where when we sort of couldn't quite make a decision, we didn't quite know where to go with something, so we just send out a survey saying this is a supplemental survey, this is a one-time thing. The nice thing about surveys is that we give them 5 days, and these are finite answers, and that's the end of it. The surveys are more ongoing conversations. So interspersing the survey, which is an ongoing conversation with very direct, short timeline surveys, has been very strategic for us. And they come around more when we have a specific need to make a decision. Like we just had a little Fab 5 campaign where we had people campaign for 2 or 3 months. What 5 retail businesses do they think are going to represent the downtown? So they came up with a whole bunch, and then none of them quite, maybe 2 of them qualified for the number of likes we thought was needed, but the other 3 didn't. So we sent out a one-time survey saying this is a one-time shot, help us decide what the final 3 are, and the decision is final. So that's when we send out a survey for. But I'd be glad to talk to you if you have any other ideas on other things, other sort of short surveys and polls that we could do in the meantime. Actually, another thing that's also very popular is I think it's called polleverywhere.com, but it allows people to vote via their cell phone. We'll put up a question and say like, what kind of housing, based on this room and people in this room, what kind of housing would you think would you support? And we just want to get an informal survey of people in the room to get an idea. And they would just vote via text and see their votes on the screen in real time, and that's something polleverywhere.com provides. And then one step beyond that, which is, I don't understand why this thing is so expensive, but there are these clickers that you hold, that you just push a number on these clickers that you give to a crowd, and then you see the instant results on screen as well. Well, those things cost about $30, $40 per clicker, and I just don't understand why they cost so much. But that's something we'd love to get into with real-time polling with crowds, but with the devices it's way too expensive, so a cheaper version is using the cell phones, and that's been extremely popular.
It might be easier just to capture that smaller audience by using QR codes in an area to prompt them to use their cell phones and go to the site to get this in the short term, that younger audience or something.
Yeah, I mean, it's also, if you want to contact me afterwards, we have someone, and this is the great thing about crowds, is that you have, I mean, I sort of refer to it as an epiphany catcher or a talent catcher, because one of the people in the crowd is developing a business tied around QR codes and trying to identify market interest. So his idea may be a little too over involved for us because he's asking for a certain level of investment because he's developing a business. But you'll get great ideas from people in the crowd. I mean, just as I am right now. And the important thing is, again, for this person who's got this job of running crowdsourced placemaking in her city, is to not just say thank you very much, but to say, well, let's talk, or could you send me what you're referring to, and then be accountable for ideas that are mentioned that seem like a pretty good idea.
It's 1 o'clock, so we should ask a couple more questions and finish up. I had one back here.
My question relates to 2 concerns, and then see if I can get into one concise question for you. But it goes back to, you were talking about your preference for a certain scale of things that relates to how things were in the 1920s. And the sort of urban forms we had in the 1920s related to, one, a much smaller individual unit of development, you might say, sort of a 5,000, 2,000 square foot lot. And that created a sort of organic development over time. So when you're talking about polling people and sort of getting a snapshot and trying to create something that is organic, my question would be is how does your timeline account for things that might change over time and the conflict between, say, a developer's desire for a return of investment over 5, 10 years, which is generally the model now, to something that relates to quality of life, which might be 100, 200 years. So is there something built into the crowdsourcing sort of model that relates to, say, adaptiveness or emergence, which are other things that are advantages of crowdsourcing and other disciplines?
Yeah, I mean that's a great question, and it's something that it has a lot of thought behind it. One graph I want to show you. Can you guys see this one called "Moving the Tipping Point for Creative Places"?
Mm-hmm.
So on the level of if a project is anything smaller than a $15 million project, you're going to have a hard time finding capital because anything most of the real estate development is funded by institutional investment. And they don't want to invest in anything smaller than a $15 million project, which equates to about a $5 million investment in capital. So that largely explains why 90% of what's built is so out of scale and so large. Is because institutional investors demand that projects be of a certain size in order to invest. So therefore, if all your money is only going to be invested with large projects, and all you're going to get is built as large projects. And so, as you can see in this yellow graph, all these developments, all we're getting is developments that reflect things in this big head. We're not getting very little built in this model right here. Even though there's a lot of money in this field, the financial systems don't allow it. And so that's also going to change. One sort of, you've heard of crowdfunding maybe with Kickstarter, Kiva, other sort of crowdfunding sort of becoming, if you do a search on crowdfunding in the news, you will see a lot of articles popping up everywhere. Even now Congress is actually looking to legalize crowdfunding to allow that be sort of more institutional investment-oriented kind of a system. I mean, not institutional, but more of a standard level of investment that's basically not allowed right now. So there's a shift at the same time to crowds also to have crowds be part of the funding. And that's fundamentally the difference between a place that's going to have this organic feel and a place that's going to look like it was built by institutional investment. I mean, I think that's the biggest reason why whenever you see new development, it looks so grand in scale, is because that's where all the money's coming from. And so this project in Bristol is probably going to have the same sort of investment capital approach. Well, what I can say to that, until the system changes, that's probably very difficult to sort of overcome that, but that is going to change. On the flip side, in Bristol, Connecticut, there are a lot of sites that are, a lot of infill sites around the area that are now being developed by local developers via the crowdsourcing method. So there's a lot of infill going on now using this methodology that's not part of this institutional invested 17-acre site, but on surrounding sites around it that are definitely going to give a more organic feel towards the redevelopment. But right now, the bottom line is there needs to be a change in how we invest in places in order to see the kinds of organic development we saw in the 20s.
What are the real prospects for that change in the next 5 to 10 years? You mentioned some developments in terms of microloans or things like that, microfunding. What's going on there, and what can we be hopeful about changing in the next 5 to 10 years?
Did you hear that, Neil?
Yeah, Rob, could you repeat that thing?
Well, the follow-up is, in the next 5 to 10 years, what are the chances for that paradigm to shift, and what might cause it to shift, like microfunding and other causes in the next 5 to 10 years? Is it realistic to think that smaller, finer-grained developments will be able to survive?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree. I think so, because it's that's where everything out. That's what's happening in every other industry. It's really pulling. I wish I had statistics on this, but for crowdfunding, it was like 5 years ago, you couldn't find any crowdfunding sites where someone had a project. Like, for instance, there was a coffee shop in outside of in Virginia that crowdfunded their project by putting it on Kickstarter, and now they're a very successful business that's become an institution and a place in their downtown. That project was crowdfunded. But crowdfunding as a tool didn't even exist 5 years ago. So if you're already getting sort of these local business establishments being funded like in the last 5 years already, in the next 5 years, at the rate of growth we're going to see a large number of local businesses opening that are crowdfunded. And the next step beyond that is you're just going to have people saying, well, I have the perfect building I put my business in, and I want to own that building. And a lot of these businesses would love to own the buildings they in, and they should, because they're the ones that revitalize a neighborhood. It's the business, not the buildings, that revitalize the neighborhood. So they should have every reason to be able to own that building. They just don't have the capital. So we're getting to a point where the neighborhood residents and investors actually will be able to crowdfund and be a part of the investment model to allow creative entrepreneurs to buy local buildings and renovate them. We're not there yet, but actually that's going to happen in the next 5 to 10 years because the signs are already there that it's already happening.
I would also chime in just in my own personal experience of having been an architect for years and years and years and now being a developer, is that one of the reasons projects are so large is that government, city and towns and states don't have the funds to bankroll the infrastructure. And so in the 30s, the towns would put in the street grid and the sewers and the power poles and the telephone poles, or the utilities would, and individual developers would take down smaller lots. But these days, all cities, Boston is a classic example, are requiring private developers, private industry, private equity to put in what was once thought of as public infrastructure. And in order to pay for that public infrastructure, you need much, much more private real estate to rent, sell, or whatever. And that's what in addition to institutional lending practices, is driving the size of projects. Another question over here.
Actually, in response to what you're saying, I think, Rob, when you're talking about street grids and infrastructure, I think that would really be more applicable for neighborhoods that basically haven't been built yet. So it's new development.
Right.
But I think if you're looking at neighborhoods, and I think that's where perhaps
well, I think Neil was talking about infill projects.
Right, exactly. Wouldn't there be a great role then for community development corporations or organizations like the Main Streets program to help fill that gap?
To bring crowdsourced placemaking into places that are infill sites with existing.
I would love to work with a Main Street program. There aren't any in the cities we're working in. But I will say this, many of you may be familiar with Kennedy Smith. She ran the National Main Street Center for about 14 years or so, and for 20 years. She's our retail go-to person for, she's the one who's done all the feasibility analyses for these businesses, and she's helping us form this retail development strategy using the Main Street principles for the towns we're working in. So we definitely love working with Main Street, but it just happens that the Main Streets there are no Main Street programs where we're working, and that's probably why we're working where we're working, is because no one really cares and there's an opportunity for change. Well, I want to make a quick point about public financing, is that we're looking at using tax increment financing so that in essence the revenues created by the project in turn fund the public improvements in the next following phases. So in some ways that's government crowdfunded. And another interesting aspect is developers will tell you by far when you get to larger projects, what adds the most cost by far to any development is the parking. And I think it's very interesting that we got emerging generations who are saying, I don't want to own a car, I don't want to pay for it, but then they're paying for it anyway because the parking comes attached to their unit. So if they had a choice to say, well, I want to cut $25,000 off the cost of my condo if I can just untether the parking space, that's the option that a lot of people are not allowed. And then San Francisco is a leader in actually providing that option, making that legal, because before it was illegal to actually unbundle parking from housing. And it's the same thing for leasing. And that's already the model here in my neighborhood in D.C. that was built in the 20s, where parking is completely separate as a cost from the housing.
I think we're starting to lose our audience as we've gone over our hour. Let me ask one final question, and then we'll thank Neil for speaking to us today. Do you see the crowds that you build through crowdsourcing, through the subscription and joining process, to then have a greater affinity and loyalty to the finished project? And do those people become a greater resource for the people who are renting housing and selling goods in retail that the people who have contributed to the creation of a place through their increased sense of ownership then support it more?
Yeah, if I could show you, I just went, I won't be able to come up with it, but if one of the developers in the development company asked to get some quotes from people who were supporting the project, and I came up with quotes that were very, just great statements from people about why they believe in this project, why they want to contribute, why they want to help, why it was meaningful to them, and I had in small type a list of them down the page, and it went for 2 pages, and I could not figure out which ones to delete. We had, so that was at least 60 to 80 comments of positive, not just saying, great project, go. It was more like, I'm so glad you're doing this. How can we get more involved? This is so important to our community. Thank you for doing this. I can't tell you the level of support. Actually, people actually come to the monthly meetups for it's almost like therapy. If they're having a bad day, they'll come to a monthly meetup and just sort of talk to and meet the people there that are just there with to have such a positive vibe for actually feeling like they're actually doing something and making something happen in their community. And they feel very empowered and they feel very fulfilled at the ends of these meetings, and they keep coming back. So I don't have any quantitative analysis, but I can show you tons of comments by people saying how much they love this process. And you know what? We kind of need to do a video documenting these people.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Neil, for addressing our group and showing us yet another approach to the making of great places. So as soon as we turn off the recording, thanks again for everybody coming. There is a sign-up sheet